Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Dr. Julian Crocker. He is the County Superintendent of Schools in San Luis Obispo, an elected position. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brad.
I am sure you heard that in Atlanta there were arrests. Your counterpart in Atlanta was arrested,
right?
As were others,
Yeah.
in connection with alleged cheating on standardized tests.
Right.
And it's clear that the motivation behind that, assuming the facts are as the prosecutor says, that teachers wanted to get higher scores because it would play into their evaluations. Talk to me about what you see out of Atlanta.
Yeah, well, of course, that's very disturbing, no
Very.
question about that. And that is kind of the extreme example of what happens if you only judge teachers based on test scores. So it's probably a good a lesson for all of us to learn.
So let's talk about that, because
Sure.
there's no question that there is a push amongst many parents to have student standardized test scores used to evaluate teachers in some capacity,
Right.
at some level. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree with that there needs to be some element of student progress connected with teacher evaluation. And in fact, it's very interesting. People don't know this, but in California right now, the existing legislation that actually goes back 30 years or so for teacher evaluation requires.
There was a lawsuit out of Los Angeles County.
Right.
And in that lawsuit, the judge was very clear. You're required to use standardized tests as part of teacher evaluation.
Right.
So a few districts have adopted. Lucia Mar, for example, in this county. You may have read the Gates Foundation came out with a study in January, and they were talking about the use of teacher standardized tests and teacher evaluations. They saw the sweet spot as 30% of the evaluation should be linked. They thought under 25% was not high enough, over 33% was too high.
much, yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, fair enough.
It's probably less than half in some ways. And again, the issue is because, on the one hand, the evaluation in terms of test scores is essentially pretty narrow, because we test only what we can test.
Sure.
So we're looking at, yes, very important issues regarding reading, language arts, and math. But there's a lot more to teaching and a student's success than just that type of performance on those kinds of tests.
But here comes the challenge.
Right.
There's no question that numbers are easy to quantify.
Right.
And there is one side of the spectrum that wants more standardized testing. They want to see more hard results. There's the other side, including Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Torlakson for the state of California, who's looking to pull back on standardized testing. He feels as if we should just do the minimum. What do you think?
I probably am closer to where Superintendent Torlakson is right now, and the issue is it's not a matter of that reading and language arts aren't important at all. It's if that drives the whole curriculum, then I think it's a very narrow curriculum. And what I hear from parents as well as teachers is that we want a much more comprehensive educational program. We want art, we want music, we want creative problem solving, we want science. I mean, something as basic as science that isn't tested, of course, foreign languages, those kinds of things. So the concern is the balance, frankly, Brad. Yes, we need to have those basic subjects and those things that can be assessed easily. It certainly needs to be there.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's a balance, as I said.
But do you see true reform?
Oh yes, no, I think there's a real push now, absolutely. And for example, in our county, the TAP program, which you
with
mentioned,
Lucia Mar.
with Lucia Mar, I think is heading in the right direction.
When we come back, sir, I want to talk more about education reform, specifically funding formulas.
Sure.
Okay, his name is Julian Crocker. He is the County Superintendent of Schools in San Luis Obispo County. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Mr. Superintendent, as you know, the governor has proposed a dramatic reform of education funding.
Right.
Under his proposal, for every student that is either ESL, foster care, or economically disadvantaged, the school district would get a 35% bump. If an entire district has 50% or more in those categories, they get another 35% bump. That could be 70%. What do you think about that?
Well, it's no question that there are certain categories of students that require more funding because they are more difficult to educate. And it's not the students' fault. It's the issues that they happen to be living in, either poverty or second language learners.
But let me ask you about poverty. Second language learners, I understand. It just takes time to get up to speed. But just because you may live in poverty, that doesn't mean you're not smart.
Oh, absolutely not. But it's the impact on the family. You may not have access to medical care, for example. You may not have a family that is intact, so to speak. You may have both parents having to work. You don't have adequate clothing. Those kinds of things that as families not in poverty don't face those issues. So students bring those problems to school.
What about other challenges? A child could be on the spectrum, autism spectrum, or a child could be highly gifted.
Right.
I mean, under this formula, I don't see dedicated monies for those kids who have different challenges.
Right. Youngsters with special education needs have a separate funding source from the federal government.
And those are categoricals that won't change?
Absolutely, because that's federal money. The governor's only talking about state categorical money.
So what about highly gifted? I mean, a highly gifted student that's not challenged is a discipline problem.
Absolutely, and under the local control funding formula, because all districts will receive either certainly no less and over time more, and many districts will receive more money, but it's very flexible at the local level. So the advantage for highly gifted kids now is that instead of the old way where there was a minimum amount of categorical money given to highly gifted youngsters, now a local board has the option of saying, let's dedicate more money to our highly gifted students.
That's appealing on one hand.
Yeah.
The flip side, though, is if there are no strings attached coming from Sacramento, there's no one minding the store. I mean, who's looking
local
at
board? Yeah, the local board.
Okay, but there are pluses and minuses to having a local board. I mean, look. In San Luis Obispo, presumably their local boards are, they have the right motivation behind them. But look, I mean, it could be that one school district is not in favor of ESL, and so they eliminate those programs because there are no strings attached to them.
Right.
So
that could be, but local boards are elected, so we can't have it both ways, is what I'm saying.
I understand.
We can't say we really want local control, we think decisions are made locally, except for this group of students, we think the state knows better. And that's the whole point. The governor is saying the state has said we know better too much. We think local decisions are best. And so with a couple of exceptions, youngsters in poverty and youngsters that are second language learners, we're basically saying, okay, you want local control? Here's the money, go to it.
So what do you think in terms of the future of this proposal? Because as we speak today, it is a proposal.
Right.
Do you see momentum building behind it? Because I've spoken with many members of the Democratic Party, the same party as the governor, who represent more affluent districts, and there's a lot of concern in these soccer mom districts that we're going to lose. I mean, San Luis Coastal, basic aid district, they could lose because they're a more affluent district, or at a minimum, they don't have that kind of 50% threshold of challenged students.
Right. I think for basic aid districts, all the proposals I've seen is that the basic aid districts will continue to receive their excess property taxes, which is the major issue for basic aid districts. So I think there's a lot of momentum behind this. I really do. There are 1,000 school districts in California, so it's a great variety within the state, and every district has a little different take on it.
What about? I mean, like I was reading, for example, the Los Angeles Times. Just an example. They were talking about how Hermosa Beach, a coastal district in Southern California, it would receive $7,800 per student under the new formula. Amino Charter High in Englewood would receive $13,500 per student.
Well, students in Englewood are very different than students in Hermosa Beach.
But are they almost double different?
Could be. The difficulty, particularly at a high school, because youngsters are overcoming the effects of poverty many times, as I said. So I think the concept is very, very valid. I support it very much. I really do. Now, there are always quirks and things that need to be taken care of, but I essentially am very, very favorable for this.
His name is Julian Crocker. He is the county superintendent of schools in San Luis Obispo County. I'm Brad Pomerance. You're watching Charter California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Chris Unger. He is a member of the Board of Trustees for San Luis Coastal Unified School District. He's also on the Board of Directors of the California School Boards Association. And so I want to talk to you about the dual, one could argue, tension between standardized tests and teacher evaluations.
And I think you're right. I think you absolutely summed it up. There is a tension between standardized testing and especially what we see now is standardized testing and the proposals for student accountability vis-a-vis teacher evaluations.
And I'm sure you heard that in Atlanta there were arrests recently, including the superintendent of schools for Atlanta. The allegation was they were fixing scores on student tests. The pressures are dramatic, and they could get even greater if certain proposals do march forward throughout the state that would include standardized test scores as part of teacher evaluations.
That's true, but the law already says that standardized tests can be used, or that student, I shouldn't say that student achievement can be used for teacher evaluations. It's just never really been done. And as always, then the question becomes, what do your tests look like? What are you testing? I'll give you an example, and I think you'll like this. As you know, I'm a special educator, and so we were talking to some folks that give the regular standardized testing. This is some of our community school kids, and the question was, so did you get some great designs on the Scantron sheet? And the answer was yes, we did. And if the kids don't take it seriously, then what does that do to the teachers, even if the teacher's been working hard?
No, that's true.
And even if the kids do take it seriously, I think a question we want to ask is that really the kind of thinking that we want kids to be able to engage in?
Well, at the same time, as I understand it, in terms of considering scores for teacher evaluations, what will be evaluated is really the trajectory. It's not so much hard numbers each year, but is the teacher seeing student score improvement year in and year out?
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, because you as a teacher, you get what you get, and so you do
you don't get upset,
and you do the very best you can with it. I mean, that's your job as a teacher. So I think the trajectory is good, but it depends on where you start. And I think kind of a more interesting metric, as it were, would be, where's the child at second grade? What's the child done at third grade? What's the child done in fourth grade?
But you have a different teacher in each grade.
You have a different teacher too.
At the same time, I do want to get a sense, though, of what can be done in light of the fact that there is so much pressure from various groups that are just vitriolically opposed to each other. Some groups want massive amounts of student scores put into the rubric. Other groups want no scores put into the rubric.
Well, I think the reality is we're going to see student achievement put into the rubric. And I think that the question is going to be how much, and then what are you actually going to be putting into the rubric? Are you going to be using the standardized state test, the California state test, or are you going to be using more locally driven, more locally based tests that look at the child's growth throughout the year instead of that one snapshot in time?
But at the same time, we have the superintendent of public instruction for the state, Tom Torlak, saying he wants to pull back on standardized tests.
But only for a year at this point, and only as a transition between what we're currently doing with the California state testing and the new, what we call smarter balance tests, which are those computer-given tests that they're computer-adapted tests, which is kind of interesting. That's another whole subject.
Okay, well, when we come back, I want to talk more about educational funding. We're speaking with Chris Unger. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. We're back. Now, Chris, I want to speak with you about public school funding. As you know, the governor has proposed really a revolution in educational funding. What he wants to do is he wants to change the local control funding formula so that all school districts will get kind of a base level, and that if a school district teaches a certain number of ESL students, foster kids, kids from economically disadvantaged homes, that for each one of those students, they'll get a 35% kicker. If the entire school district has 50% more in that category, they'll get a whole chunk of 35%. What do you think about that, sir?
Well, it would lead, I think, to, some people would say it would lead to more equitable distribution of funds for California's kids, for the education of California's kids. I don't think it's perfected yet. The 35% is great, because we know that kids who are English language learners, kids who are who
economically
have
disadvantaged.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the economically disadvantaged, because we know that those are the kids where we see the achievement gap. And so I think there is a nexus between more funding availability and being able to help these kids achieve.
But at a certain level, should a school district essentially get 70% more than another school district because they happen to have students that are from economically disadvantaged homes? I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean those kids aren't smart.
No, and what do you do? You've really hit it, because what do you do if you've got a district that's, say, 80% kids that are right where you want them to be, that aren't getting those 35% kickers, but yet you've got another 20%, say 2 of your schools, that are heavily impacted. Those schools are going to miss out, and those kids are going to miss out.
And the flip side is, what if 80% do qualify under those standards, 20% don't? The kids in that 20% will get all these benefits, yet they could be living on the coast.
Exactly.
And go to an incredibly affluent school district with lots of PTA involvement.
Right. And that's another whole thing we could talk about is parent involvement in schools. And how you determine what's fair about a school that is able to raise a lot of money versus a school that's not able to raise a lot of money. And perhaps that's one of the reasons that giving kids in need extra money, targeting those kids, is a good thing. But that's going to be a political discussion.
Now, San Luis Coastal is a basic aid district.
Correct.
Which means you get your funding strictly from property taxes, because you cross the threshold if the state had given you money. Will that basic aid status change under this funding formula?
We will remain a basic aid school district, but what we've seen, the figures I've seen, is they will maintain the amount of state monies that they say we should get over a period of years. So we won't see that growth.
You won't see kickers. You're not eligible for kickers.
Well, we'd be eligible for kickers for individual students, because 30% of our students, we know, are socioeconomically
30%.
disadvantaged.
You're not at the 50%.
Over 30. We're not over the 50%. But we'd say 33% of our students are socioeconomically disadvantaged.
So even as a basic aid district, you get the per student kicker.
Now, I don't know that. What I do know is that we're not planning on getting it. And the hard part for our school district is that we won't really see any growth over that period of time. And that's the hold harmless that they talk about. But really, it sort of puts us in neutral.
Yeah. Do you like the fact that whether you get kickers or not, there will be less strings being strung from Sacramento, because part of the plan is to eliminate categoricals and not require certain minimum standards?
The thing about categoricals is they were targeted for kids in need.
Right.
And they were set aside for specific programs which help kids. One of the interesting discussions all school districts are going to be facing is, this extra money goes into your general fund. Do you make it available for salary increases? Because if you make it available for salary increases, then you're not making it available for kids necessarily, targeting those kids with specific needs. That, I think, is going to be a huge discussion.
Where do you think this goes? What does the CSBA say, for example?
Well, the CSBA is generally in favor of it.
Because
they think,
lots of diverse interests?
Well, lots of diverse interests. We have always believed that it's important to have more local control for your money.
I can imagine.
That good decisions are made locally. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is those good decisions are made locally, but we still need to be able to have accountability. And what does that mean?
We'll talk more about that soon. Okay. He's Chris Unger. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition. Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Patrick Mullen. He is the president of the Board of Trustees for Cuesta Community College. Sir, congratulations is in order. As we know, Cuesta College was on what's called show cause by the accrediting agency, and you successfully were removed from show cause. You could go one way or the other. If you went the other way, you would have lost accreditation. You were at that level. Instead, you dropped 2 levels down. I guess you are on, what's it called, the bottom level that you're on right now?
Warning.
Warning.
Which is the least severe of any sanction.
What went right?
Well, I think finally accepting that we really owned the issue and that the college really had to look inside at what caused us to get there and what we needed to do, more importantly, what we needed to do to turn it around. And it finally, really it was the realization that pointing fingers, trying to look at, blaming one group or one issue or another wasn't the solution. But it was coming together and looking at what we needed to do.
This was a long journey. I mean, I think it's fair to say, I've spoken with President Storr, and he had said it probably dates back to 2005 when there was a loss of one of his predecessors, been so many since. And now look, it's 8 years later, and finally you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on the accreditation side. I must ask, some have been pointing at the Board of Trustees, and so how have you kind of tried to manage that in a way? So like you said, it's not pointing fingers, but just getting the job done.
Right, and I think it starts at the top. So it started with leadership, really looking at what we needed to do to really turn things around, getting the administration, the faculty, the staff, the community all on board to really look at what do we need to do to really make the changes to address these deficiencies. And it was really changing the culture. Part of it, that and the morale.
And so you're on warning, the lowest level.
Correct.
But they're going to come back in 2014, as I understand it.
That's right.
So what do you do to kind of just stay on track?
Yeah.
So you're off, you're not even in the purview of the accreditation agency.
And the way it works is every 6 years you have to go through and be reaffirmed in your accreditation. And in the past, it was about a once every 6 year exercise.
You've been once every year or so?
Exactly. Yeah. What's changed though is it's no longer a once every 6 year exercise. It's something that you live every day and every year. You've got to keep your eye on the ball. And I think we got complacent and took our eye off the ball on some of those issues. And over time, the standards went up, but we hadn't kept up with them.
What's stunning, though, is I believe it's the largest community college in the state, San Francisco City College. They're on show cause, as I understand it. I mean, this really sent shockwaves through the entire California community college system. I know you're not part of that community college, but still, I mean, what does that say?
Well, one, the standards have risen for all of us. And I think if colleges haven't kept abreast of what those standards are, and kept focused on what it takes to continually improve. And that was one of the things that we were deficient in, our integrated planning, which really means continuous quality improvement. What are we doing to ensure we're continuously improving the quality of the education we're delivering?
What would you say to the Board of Trustees in San Francisco who are at the beginning of their journey? You've lived it and you're on the other side. What would you say to them?
I think the hardest thing for us was to get everyone aligned and focused on what do we need to do to correct it, and then to support and work towards making those tough changes. You really have to take ownership of the issue and the problem and recognize it's going to be tough and a lot of work to turn things around and get everyone aligned on that goal.
When we come back, I want to speak with you about other funding formulas that are being proposed in connection with Cuesta and community colleges generally. We're speaking with Patrick Mullen. He is with the Cuesta Community College District. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, part of the challenge, though, has been funding. We know that the state took an economic dive, dramatic, draconian cuts to community colleges. Prop 30 passed, so that should help. But there's also discussions locally about whether it's time for Cuesta to ask the voters to become generous and pass a bond. Where are you on that front?
Well, we're studying that right now. In fact, the state reductions that have hit Cuesta College are over $9 million, almost $10 million. In the past 4 years, we've had to cut our budget from $54 million down to $45 million.
So that's
that took
almost
some
20%.
Significant cuts, exactly. We're one of the few colleges in California, community colleges, that has yet to pass a bond.
Ever?
Yes, or in at least in the last 20 years.
History.
Correct, in recent history. So that's we failed in an attempt to pass a bond.
I remember that.
In '06, and we learned some good lessons from that. But we definitely are focused on, at some point in the future, we're going to need to do that.
Let me ask you, as we speak today, in order to pass a bond, you need 67% of the vote, unless you're looking towards construction, and then you may be able to hit 55%.
Correct.
But at the same time, there are rumors up in Sacramento that maybe the formula should be changed to drop the threshold to 55% for all bonds of that nature. What's your sense of that?
We're not waiting for that.
Okay, fair.
We'll be looking more at a bond that would help us maintain our facilities,
So it would be
upgrade our
construction.
facilities. Yes, and infrastructure repair. A lot of it is our campuses. Well, in fact, this is our 50th anniversary this month.
Congratulations.
Coming up in just a couple of weeks.
Right.
It's Cuesta's 50th anniversary.
So you're moving forward, but you're only going to focus on construction infrastructure, so 55% will be your threshold?
That's what the board's looking at now, and that's what we're studying. I'd be surprised. I mean, obviously, I don't want to predict what the board's going to do, but what we're looking at now, and really what the needs of the campus and for our students is infrastructure repair and upgrades and maintenance.
I also want to talk to you about another potential change in community colleges, and that is the adult school program. Surprisingly, intuitively, you would think that adult school would be in community colleges, but historically they've been in K-12. Right. The governor's talking about transferring that responsibility to community colleges in the fall. That's tomorrow, essentially. Is Cuesta, as an example of a community college, ready for that?
No, it's something we're concerned about.
Be honest. Yeah.
No, it's something we're concerned about because right now we're not adequately funded of
Let
state
alone
funding for universities at the UC level, at the CSU level, and K-12 all receive more per student than we receive at the community college level. We get about $5,000 per student a year. And right now, given the reductions of over $9 million in the last 4 years to our budget, we're struggling, in fact, have had to change actually and reduce the programs that we can offer to live within those means. So we're focusing on our basic mission of transfer education to four-year universities.
Which is required under Governor Brown's proposals, under the reforms of last year.
Now you have to be on a program. You can't just take classes forever without being focused. But also career technical education. That's huge, and basic skills.
But where do you go from here? I mean, it does seem as if that community colleges are being squeezed from all fronts.
Right.
Pick up adult education. Yeah, you got a little more from Prop 30, but it's going to be hard to pass a bond.
Yeah.
It's like no matter where you look, you're being trapped.
Well, we can no longer be all things to all people.
Which is a shame.
It's a horrible shame. It's a travesty.
What if I want
It's a travesty that we're not able to.
I want to take Spanish or Japanese, or I want to take ceramics.
Right.
You can't do that anymore.
Most you still can. Well, or through community programs, we've had to move some of those over to fee-based. So if it's not part of those three core areas of our mission, of the mission of Cuesta College, then those programs, many of them we've moved over to what's called community programs, and they're a fee-based, pay your way to fund the program.
Speaking of fee-based, you may have heard Assemblymember Doss Williams, Santa Barbara down south. He has proposed a bill that would allow community colleges to have intercession courses, and they'd be fee-based. That means they're a lot more money.
Right.
What do you think?
We're not supportive of that for those classes that focus on transfer credits to four-year universities, because that's our basic mission.
Sure.
So we don't support that and haven't.
But couldn't please.
For non-core programs, if you want to take an enrichment course, a senior citizen wants to take a photography course and go back, those programs may be under community programs.
The argument goes that if you can take that class, intercession, you don't have to wait another year, so it's actually a savings. Because you're not waiting another year.
But are you serving the needs of your constituents and your community and students? And that's what we're focused on. All students. Students at whatever stage in life they may be at that they need education, they need to go back. Are they needing retraining because their job has changed or they've been unemployed? Are they a student with a disability? Are they a veteran returning?
Oh, it's tricky.
We have a lot of veterans.
He's Patrick Mullen. He's president of the Cuesta Community College District. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition.